Hello and welcome back. Today is a rainy day as the hurricane wanders up the East Coast, and I just thought I would do something quick and simple, I guess, but still festive. I'd like to get into the Halloween season, but I thought I would read sections on the Sabbats from different witchcraft books. Starting with Samhain, I kind of wish I would have started with Lunasa, or Lammas, but there's always next year, so we'll get into it with Samhain. And this first one is from Witchcraft, the Modern Witch's Book of Herbs, Magic, and Dreams by Garina Dunwich. I really like this book. It's kind of just an overview. Samhain is the most important of all 8 witches' Sabbats. As Halloween, it is one of the best known of all Sabbats outside the Wiccan community, and most misunderstood and feared. Samhain celebrates the end of the goddess-ruled summer and marks the arrival of the god-ruled winter. The name Samhain means summer's end. Samhain is also the ancient Celtic Druid New Year, the beginning of the cider season, and a solemn rite and festival of the dead. It is the time when spirits of deceased loved ones and friends are honored, and at one time in history, many believed that it was the night when the dead returned to walk among the living. Samhain night is the ideal time to make contact with and receive messages from the spirit world. The Christianized version of Samhain is All Saints' Day, November 1st, which was introduced by Pope Boniface IV in the 7th century to supplant the pagan festival. All Souls' Day, which falls on November 2nd, is another Christian adaptation on the ancient festival of the dead. It is observed by the Roman Catholic Church as a sacred day of prayer for souls in purgatory. In many other parts of England, it was believed that the ghosts of all persons who were destined to die in the coming year could be seen walking through the graveyards at midnight on Samhain. Many of the ghosts were thought to be of an evil nature, and so for protection, jack-o'-lanterns with hideous candle-lit faces were carved out of pumpkins and carried as lanterns to scare away the malevolent spirits. In Scotland, the traditional Hallows jack-o'-lantern was carved out of turnips. An old Samhain custom in Belgium was to prepare special cakes for the dead, small white cakes or cookies. A cake was eaten for each spirit honored, with the belief that the more cakes you ate, the more the dead would bless you. Another old Samhain custom was to light a fire on the household hearth, which would burn continuously until the first day of the following spring. Huge bonfires were also lit on the hilltops at sunset in honor of the old gods and the goddesses, and to guide the souls of the dead home to their kin. It was on Samhain that the Druids tallied their livestock and mated their ewes for the coming spring. Surplus breeding stock were sacrificed to the fertility deities, and wicker effigies of people and horses were burned as sacrificial offerings. It is said that lighting a new orange-colored candle at midnight on Samhain and allowing it to burn until sunrise will bring one good luck. However, according to an old legend, bad luck will befall those who bake bread on this day or journey after sunset. The divinatory arts of scrying, crystal gazing, and rune casting on the magical night of Samhain are Wiccan traditions, as is standing before a mirror and making a secret wish. The traditional pagan foods of the Samhain Sabbat are apples, pumpkin pie, hazelnuts, cakes for the dead, corn, cranberry muffins and breads, ale, cider, and herbal teas. This next one is from To Ride a Silver Broomstick by Silver Ravenwolf. I wonder how they'll be different. Everyone's practice is different, and I think we need to keep that in mind. And you can always make it your own and change what you need to change. But for this passage, Halloween, also known as Samhain, Celtic, Shadowfest, Strega, Martinmas, or Old Hallowmas, Scottish and Celtic. This holiday is considered the witch's new year, representing one full turn of the seasonal year. This is the last of the 3 harvest Sabbats. Halloween is celebrated on October 31st. Samhain is recognized as November 7th, All Hallows Eve, and Martinmas on November 11th. All festivals stand for the same purpose. I'll not kid you, Halloween is my favorite Sabbat. Celebrations to honor the dead are done at this ritual, along with speaking with those who have passed over. Divination is heightened on this night. It is said that on this night the veil between the worlds is weakest. Jack-o'-lanterns, gourds, cider, and other fares of the season can be used in ritual and family celebration. Black candles are used to ward off negativity. I start preparing for Samhain in September. I hand make all the children's costumes and also decorations to be hung about the house. I begin putting these decorations out faithfully on the 1st of October. There are witches plastered all over the front and sides of my house, and outside I hang windsocks I have made for protection depicting Halloween scenes. I hang a pentacle wreath above my wall altar decorated with ravens, little brooms, orange feathers, and ribbons. Pots of large golden yellow mums are placed about the house, and some of the rooms are repainted for the celebration if necessary. I buy my new house broom now. It is always black. Close to Samhain, I tape a balloon on the top and stick the proverbial witch's hat atop and set it on my front stoop. I give this witch a name and ask her to protect the house during our community mischief night. I started this little ritual because one year I had a skeleton on my one and only favorite rocking chair on our stoop. He was covered in fake cobwebs and spiders and lighted for the occasion. He really did look fine. Too fine, I suppose, because after mischief night, not only was my skeleton missing, but so was my favorite rocking chair. At dinner on Samhain, our family sets an empty place for those who have departed who were dear to us. Since the passing of another family member last year, we have begun to set a separate table for them, as they were crowding out the hungry living tummies at the main table. This next one is from The Sabbats, A New Approach to Living the Old Ways by Elaine McCoy. The Sabbat, called Samhain, has many meanings. Among these, it marks the end of the 3rd and final harvest. It is a day to commune with and remember the dead, and it is a celebration of the eternal cycle of reincarnation. There are 2 possible sources for the origin of the Samhain Sabbat's name. One is from the ancient Indian god of death, Samana, and the other is from the Irish Gaelic word that I'm not even going to try to pronounce, which literally means the summer's end. Also, sidebar, I don't think the first part is correct because Samana is not a god of the dead. So, moving on. Samhain marked the end of summer and the beginning of winter for the Celts, with the day after Samhain being the official date of the Celtic New Year. The reason the Celts chose this point in time as their new year rather than Yule, when the rest of Western pagans celebrate it, was because the sun is at its lowest point on the horizon, as measured by the ancient standing stones of Britain and Ireland. In the European traditions, Samhain is the night when the old god dies, and the crone goddess mourns him deeply for the next 6 weeks. The popular image of her as the old Halloween hag menacingly stirring her cauldron comes from the Celtic belief that all dead souls return to her cauldron of life, death, and rebirth to await reincarnation. Unfortunately, the crone goddess has been an object of fear and revulsion in modern societies, and this was definitely not the way our pagan ancestors viewed her. The crone was always revered as a woman of power, whose vast stores of wisdom came with her great age and the lifelong practice of her many skills. She was both the destroyer and the healer, and the grandmother and the eternal womb of rebirth. Her cauldron is deeply a part of the Samhain mythos, representing the great cosmic womb in which all things are conceived, grow, and are born. The cauldron became a popular tool among European witches because, unlike many pagan ritual tools, the cauldron was an everyday object needed for household chores, such as cooking and cleaning, and could not be held up in the ecclesiastical courts as evidence of witchcraft. In some pagan traditions, the cauldron replaces the cup or chalice as the ritual tool representing the water element. Samhain is popularly known today as Halloween, a contraction of the words hallowed evening, and it retains much of the original form and meaning it had long ago in Celtic lands, despite the efforts of the Church to turn it into an observance of feasting and prayer for their vast pantheon of saints. The Church began by calling it Michaelmas, the feast day of St. Michael, but the old Samhain holiday proved to be too potent a drawing card for one lone saint to combat, so it was renamed the Eve of All Saints, or All Hallows Eve, which precedes All Saints' Day and is still one of the holiest days in Catholicism. But even after all this effort, so much Samhain lore and practice remained within the popular culture that the Church was finally forced to diabolize Samhain into a night boiling with evil spirits. According to the Church, these baneful creatures were dispelled only when morning broke on All Saints' Day to the ringing of the church bells. The 1940 animated Disney classic Fantasia presents a lavishly drawn sequence set to the music of A Night on Bald Mountain, which clearly illustrates the early church's position. When the church diabolized paganism and its deities, they began a successful campaign of fear-mongering among Christians concerning Samhain. Even today, in many parts of rural Britain and Ireland, leaving the safety of hearth and home is discouraged on this night. Unfortunately, the idea of Samhain being a night of unleashed evil took hold in the collective mind, and now all manner of mayhem and violence occurs around Samhain, though these terrors have absolutely nothing to do with the original meaning of the pagan holiday. Instead, these horrors are the creation of modern humanity's all too vivid imagination. Pagan author and high priestess Laurie Cabot wrote of modern Halloween violence in her book, The Power of the Witch. Is there any better proof, for those who doubt the efficacy of witchcraft, that mental projections become real? With all the negative press about paganism at this season of year, it is not only a good time to throw your energy into an anti-defamation effort, but you might also consider joining the fight to preserve the integrity of whatever rights of free speech govern your country. This basic freedom, taken for granted in so much of the West, has come under serious attack in the last decade by those in power who wish to prevent us from disseminating information on any topic not in line with their narrow worldview. Needless to say, paganism is high on their list of no-nos. The pagan Samhain is not and never was associated with evil or negativity. It has always been a time to reaffirm our belief in the oneness of all spirits and in our firm resolution that physical death is not the final act of existence. Though death is very much a part of Samhain symbolism, this Sabbath also celebrates the triumph of life over death. The idea that evil spirits walk the earth at Samhain is a misinterpretation of the pagan belief that the veil of consciousness which separates the land of the living from the land of the dead is at its thinnest on this night. This does not mean that hordes of evil entities cross this chasm. Some pagans believe this veil is made thin by the gods passing through it into the land of the dead, and that he will, for the sake of his people, attempt to hold back any spirits crossing into the physical plane whose intent it is to make trouble. In nearly all the Western pagan traditions, deceased ancestors and other friendly spirits are invited to join the Sabbath festivities and be reunited with loved ones who are otherwise separated by time and dimensions of existence. All these spirits, especially those of the recently departed, are asked to help in divinations and ritual, and it was considered a propitious time to strengthen karmic ties with those whom you wished to be with again throughout another lifetime. While it is true that Samhain is no more evil than any other holiday, it is also a fact that evil does exist, and pagans have always been aware of this. Our ancestors sought to protect themselves on this night by carving faces and vegetables to place near windows or at the perimeters of their circle. These were the forerunners of our present-day jack-o'-lanterns. These carved pumpkin faces are probably relics of the even earlier custom of placing candles in windows to guide the earth-walking spirits along their way. Today, it is still a custom in Ireland to place candles in the windows on Samhain and to leave plates of food for the visiting spirits. These are simple but ancient pagan ideas which can be easily incorporated into today's Samhain observances. Window candles are commonly sold from September through January for use at Christmas, and they can be purchased rather inexpensively. Because they are electric, you avoid the risk which fires present, while still maintaining the feeling and warmth of candlelight. Food can be placed out for ancestors and other spirits by arranging it on a small tray or plate and placing it outside one of your lighted windows. It was this custom of leaving out food which evolved into our modern trick-or-treat. The Samhain observance may deal with the uncomfortable subject of death, but it is not entirely a somber occasion. This is also a time for harmless pranks, lavish feasting, circle games, and merrymaking, which can be teasingly blamed on nearby spirits. The best-known pagan prankster is the Lord of Misrule, a personification of the spirit of fun and hedonism who invades the circle, creating pleasant havoc and reminding us that even in the face of death there is reason to rejoice. His job is also to keep the circle from becoming melancholy at the thought that summer is at an end and the harsh days of winter lie ahead. In other traditions, this Lord of Misrule is called the Abbot of Unreason, the King of the Bean, the Jester, and the Master of Merry Disport. In the Norse tradition, this is the time when the power of Loki, the trickster god, reached its peak. He is a god who delights in playing tricks on humans, animals, spirits, and other deities. In Rome, Samhain was a day on which everything was turned upside down, when kings were slaves and slaves were kings. This was done in honor of the apple goddess Pomona, whose sacred holiday this was. At night they lit fires in honor of the next day's festival, the festival of Fortuna, the goddess of wealth and luck. Feasting and drinking to her honor, as well as performing rituals so that she might favor the petitioners, were all a part of the observance. Pomona and Fortuna were thought to be able to go into the land of the dead together and bring recently departed relatives back from the spirit world to join with their living families for the celebrations. Mexico, a land thoroughly immersed in patriarchal religion, nonetheless maintains many small ties to its pagan past. 2 days after Samhain, they celebrate Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. This is a time to honor one's ancestor with drinking and fasting, and to toast to the personification of death, who was once believed to take this day as his one day off for the year. Businesses and schools close on El Dia de Muerte, and picnics are packed and taken to graveyards, where families sit near their relatives' markers and share their feast with them. Individuals dressed as death dance among the revelers, and convivial mariachi music is always played nearby. Chocolate is a delicacy traditionally served on El Dia de Muerte. The idea that candy should be a part of this celebration may have come from a long-forgotten pagan observance of wishing the dead a sweet return to life for their next incarnation. The most popular way to serve chocolate in Mexico is as a frothy, hot drink laced with tequila. There's a recipe here. Chocolate de Mexicanos serves 4 1/4 cups milk, 4 ounces semi-sweet baking chocolate melted, 5 tablespoons sugar, 1/2 tablespoon cinnamon, 1/2 tablespoon vanilla, 1/8 teaspoon allspice, 1 shot of tequila. Place all ingredients in a large saucepan and bring to a boil. With a handheld mixer or a traditional molinillo, a wooden beater resembling a honey dipper, beat the mixture until it stops boiling and becomes slightly frothy. Stir in tequila. Serve immediately in mugs garnished with cinnamon sticks. Samhain bonfires, called balefires in paganism, were once lighted on every hilltop in Britain and Ireland as soon as the sun set on October 30th. The word balefire comes from the word boon, which means extra. The fire serves the purpose of containing the energy of the dead god, lighting the dark night, warding off evil, ushering in the light of the new year, purifying the ritual space or home, and being the focus of ritual. In many parts of the British Isles, these balefires are still lighted on Samhain to honor the old ways. Unfortunately, in the United States, the custom of community Halloween bonfires died out as fear and violence pushed celebrations indoors. For a glimpse of this custom and how it was practiced in America a century ago, get a copy of the 1944 MGM musical, Meet Me in St. Louis. Pets played a role in even the earliest of human societies, and as winter forced people and their animals to seek shelter together indoors, pagans soon realized that they could form working partnerships with them. These working partners are called familiars, and are deeply associated with witchcraft, both in fact and fallacy, with the most popular conception of them being the ubiquitous black cat. Familiars are not just pets, but highly psychic animals who let it be known that they wish to help with magic and ritual. For example, I have owned many dogs, and none of them was ever interested when I began to do a spell or ritual. And since I was not overly interested in having a familiar, this disregard did not bother me. But now my 5-year-old Sheltie is my working partner. He let me know this was what he wanted by showing an immense interest whenever I opened my magic cabinet and began removing items for specific rites. He would insist on being inside the circle when I worked, and had an uncanny sense of its boundaries. When I meditate, he lies nearby, usually between my legs, and acts as my lookout. I can both see and feel his interest in what I do, and I can sense his added energy when he is near. Occasionally, a pagan will ask how he or she can find a familiar. The best place to start is with your own beloved pet, because you already have a relationship with it based on love and trust. Let it know you want it to work with you by having it near when you fashion magic, rather than banishing it to the backyard. Allow it to smell your herbs and oils, and to get a close-up look at your tools and altar. Its energies can never harm your working implements in any way. If your pet is interested in being your working partner, it will find a way to let you know. It is unethical to get a new pet just to have a familiar, especially since there is no guarantee that the new animal will want any part of your work. If you really feel you want a familiar, you can make a charm to attract one out of orange cloth stuffed with catnip, valerian, and rosemary that can be hung in various places in your house. Mentally send out a call for a familiar and see if any animal answers you. Be open to whatever comes your way. You may not get a domestic animal, but a wild one who always manages to wander into your yard when you begin a ritual or spell. The humble autumn gourd, known as the pumpkin, has become the most prevalent symbol of Samhain for both pagans and non-pagans, mostly due to the practice of carving them into jack-o'-lanterns. The jack-o'-lantern is at least 2,000 years old. The first were made in Ireland and were simple faces carved in turnips, which could be easily carried if one needed to travel during the night. They were designed to frighten away evil spirits who were following deceased loved ones and blocking their way into the land of the dead, and also to protect the living. Today, jack-o'-lanterns are still usually carved with leering faces and are seen as offering protections through the dark October night. Faces, rather than other available and more abstract designs, were not chosen at random to be carved onto the jack-o'-lanterns. The ancient Celts considered the head the most sacred part of the body, and at one time even held a cult-like veneration for it. In battle, the Celtic warriors would take the heads from their enemies and mount them up on top of poles to guard their villages and encampments. For them, the head was not only seen as the center of learning, but also as the seat of the immortal soul, and therefore a repository for all knowledge. In death, as in life, it was believed that the attributes of a person of strength and agility, such as a warrior, were able to be used as a continual protective force. The most famous head of protection was that of the Celtic god, Bran the Blessed, whose noble noggin was mounted high on the site where the infamous Tower of London now stands. As insurance against future invasion, he was turned to face the English Channel, from where the greatest threat to the islands always came. But despite these ancient beliefs, all jack-o'-lanterns do not have to have faces with eyes, nose, and mouth. There are many creative uses for the pumpkin, and a variety of unique ways to carve them. Visit any craft store or seasonal display area in your supermarket in October, and you will find an array of intricate carving tools and patterns for putting detailed pictures on your pumpkin. Most of these are very pagan, with drawings of death, flying witches, and smiling ghosts, the most popular patterns. Even if you don't have the time or interest to devote to these detailed carvings, you can still make your jack-o'-lantern a little different. Try carving hearts, stars, interlaced knots, or pentagrams instead. You can cut the top off of smaller pumpkins and gourds and use them as candle holders in your home, circle, or for a party. Medium-sized pumpkins can be turned into lovely luminaria to light party guests or trick-or-treaters' way to your door. Luminaria, a Latin word meaning lights, are usually seen at Christmas and are made by placing candles or other lights in paper bags. Both of these luminaria have the same function, to light the way for night travelers and friendly spirits. To make luminaria, instead of opening your pumpkins from the top, open them from the side by carving a wide circle in them. Scoop out the insides as you would for a regular jack-o'-lantern. Cut a few small holes in the top to let the heat escape, and place a small votive candle in the center. Set these outside with the open sides shining over your walkways. Be sure to blow them out before you go to bed. As part of the harvest feast, pumpkins are served in many forms: cakes, cookies, casseroles, puddings, and breads. But the best loved and most familiar is this scrumptious pumpkin pie, which adorns the harvest tables of both pagans and non-pagans, from Mabon to Thanksgiving. There's a recipe here for Granny McCoy's pumpkin pie. Makes 2 9-inch pies. 3 cups cooked pumpkin, canned is fine. 1 1/4 cups evaporated milk. 2 and a half cups granulated sugar, half a heaping teaspoon of ground nutmeg, half a scant teaspoon of salt, 1/4 rounded teaspoon allspice, half a rounded teaspoon of cinnamon, 4 well-beaten eggs. Preheat oven to 375, mix all ingredients thoroughly and pour into 2 deep unbaked pie shells. Bake for about 50 minutes or until a knife comes out of the center clean. Not all of the strange faces seen on the streets at Samhain belong to the jack-o'-lantern. Odd collections of children and adults are seen wandering around the most mainstream places, even in the lobbies of large banks, sporting bizarre clothing and masked faces. Masks are one of the oldest body adornments known to humankind. All body adornments once served ritual purposes, and, in fact, masks are the ancestors of our present-day cosmetics. They have been used ritually in all cultures of the world to invoke animal or totem energies, to aid sympathetic magic, to raise power, and to imitate the deities. The first known mask dates from the Paleolithic period, and is represented in a cave drawing in southern France. The tradition of masking one's face at Samhain goes so far back in history that it is difficult to know just what the original significance may have been. Some pagan scholars believe it was originally a form of sympathetic magic. Whenever masking represents a particular goal, it is considered to be sympathetic magic. For example, if your goal was to have a successful hunt, you would mask yourself as your prey and seek to think like and become that animal. It is conceivable that the earliest Samhain masks were of game animals, so that the hunters would be able to catch the desired game and feed their clan and communities through the harsh winter ahead. Making a mask. Some modern scholars claim that Samhain masking was a ploy to scare away fairies and other mischievous spirits, but it has overtones of being a custom of a much later period, perhaps one which grew up around the burning times. During the burning times, masking and dark clothing hid the identities of witches going to their covens, so that they might escape detection. The mask also had the added benefit of frightening away any inquisitor who might happen upon a lone figure in the night woods. Many masks are available commercially in October, including some that might interest pagans, or you can make your own. There are many methods to use, and some are so simple a child could make them. Almost everyone has a mask made in elementary school by using a paper plate with eye holes cut in it and a rubber band to hold it in place. More elaborate masks can be made from paper mache. This requires cutting strips of newspaper, which will eventually form the shape of your mask. To bond them, you must immerse them in a bowl which contains a thick paste made from flour and water. Begin with 3 cups of flour and 1½ cups of water. Mix these together, varying the proportions slightly until you achieve a thick consistency. As a base for the paper mache mask, you might try a small cardboard box, a large balloon, or a broad-based wig stand. Any of these things will be large enough to allow you to place your head in them. Be sure to cut eye holes first, and any holes you need for breathing, and work your paper strips around these openings. Once the paste dries, it will be virtually impossible to cut holes. You can shape the mask any way you like by molding and building the strips of paper. The elderly and dying great horned god with his proud stag's antlers is the god form honored at Samhain, and you can make a horned god mask by taking 2 sections of rolled newspaper and placing wet paper mache strips around them. Then you can add more wet strips to attach the horns to the body of the mask. For other masks, you can build the forms you need in the same manner. When you have finished with the body of the mask, you can add facial features, color, words, symbols, etc. with acrylic craft paint. You can also glue on sequins, beads, buttons, hair, or any other decoration you like. Another indisputable symbol of Samhain is the witch's besom. The besom is the witch's broomstick, and though it is not a tool of paganism in the modern sense, it was often utilized in the magical practice of the Middle Ages. Like the cauldron, the besom was an everyday household object and could not be held up as a sign of witchcraft in the courts. This fact elevated their prominence as magical tools, often taking the place of wands and staves. Because of this association, it is not surprising that they quickly became objects of magical protection. Besoms were often placed near the hearth of the home to protect the opening, and many pagans still believe a besom at the fireplace will prevent evil from entering. If negativity is a problem, just take your besom and visualize yourself sweeping these feelings out the door. Using the besom to sweep away negativity from a circle site was common practice, one still observed by many pagans. Placing the broom you jumped over at your hand-fasting pagan marriage under your bed is not only protective, but is said to perk up waning sexual appetites. And for those who wish to be married, a strong act of sympathetic magic is to jump a broom each morning upon arising, and each night before going to bed from the new to the full moon. Ashes collected for spell work were thought to work best if first swept up by a magic besom, rather than an everyday cleaning broom, which might negate the beneficial energies of the ashes. The besom is a phallic symbol, and was used by female witches in fertility rites, and it is from this that the idea of the Halloween witch riding around on a broomstick may also have materialized. The sweeping end was usually made of the European broom herb, a feminine herb. Thus, the broom was complete as a representation of the female and male together. At Halloween, we are bombarded with images of the demonized crone goddess riding her broom across the moon. The idea that witches could fly on broomsticks may have been a misunderstanding of astral projection, a sending forth of one's consciousness to other places. An old, untitled English nursery rhyme, which has no doubt been altered over the years, may have once shielded Samhain pagan lore about the crone goddess from the witch hunters. There was an old woman tossed up in a basket, 17 times as high as the moon. Where she was going, I couldn't but ask it, for in her hand she carried a broom. The besom-style brooms structured differently in shape from the flat ones sold today. They're round on the end and have a smaller sweeping surface. With winter imminent, European pagans sought to stockpile food for the harsh times ahead. In every known culture in Western Europe, fresh meat was always a part of the Sabbath feast. The predominantly herding cultures of Britain and Eastern Europe slaughtered much of their livestock before Samhain, rather than trying to feed the animals on the foliage throughout the long winters. In southern Germany, ritualized hunts were held in the weeks before Samhain to gather food. They gave homage to the horned god as master of the hunt, and rode in wild frenzies as they chased their prey. Pigs were a traditional part of the feast in many pagan cultures, particularly in the Middle East, where they are sacred to the goddess of that region. It was in an effort to wipe out goddess worship that the Jews and later the Muslims banned the consumption of pork. Potatoes, harvested from August to October, were also a part of the feast in Ireland, where they were made into a Samhain dish known as colcannon. Colcannon is a mashed potato, cabbage, and onion dish still served in Ireland on All Saints' Day. It was an old Irish tradition to hide in it a ring for a bride, a button for a bachelor, a thimble for a spinster, and a coin for wealth, or any other item which local custom decreed in keeping with the idea of the new year as a time for divination. If you make colcannon with these little objects inside, please exercise caution against choking. There's a recipe for colcannon that serves 8. 4 cups mashed potatoes, 2½ cups cabbage cooked and chopped fine, ½ a cup of butter. Avoid corn oil margarines as they will not add the needed body and flavor. ½ a cup of evaporated milk or cream, 3/4 of a cup of onion chopped very fine and sautéed, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/8 teaspoon of white pepper. Sauté onions. Traditionalists sauté in lard or grease, but butter is acceptable. Boil the potatoes and mash them. Do not use artificial potato flakes. In a large pan, place all of the ingredients except the cabbage and cook over low heat while blending them together. Turn the heat to medium and add the chopped cabbage. The mixture will take on a pale green cast. Keep stirring occasionally until the mixture is warm enough to eat. Lastly, drop in the thimble, button, ring, and coin. Stir well and serve. Since Samhain marks the end of the third and final harvest, Celtic custom decreed that all crops must be gathered by sundown on October 30th. To dare to harvest anything after this night was risking the worst luck, since the Fukas, nasty-tempered hobgoblins, claimed for themselves whatever remained uncut in the fields. Other cultures had similar taboos about unharvested grains. In Asia, cutting the last remaining stalk was thought to impair male virility, and in Native America, it was believed to kill the Reverend Corn grandmother. In Scotland, cutting the remaining grain would bring down the wrath of the Gaelic Bower, the cold hag or blue hag of the Highlands, who brought death in winter. In Saxony, the last stalks could be cut completely, but they had to be harvested by a young woman dressed as a bride. All manner of fairies, mostly baneful, were believed to roam the earth on the night of October 31st. The pagan Scots were known for giving obligatory libations to their fairy folk during the Samhain rituals. A libation of milk poured on a stone for them was called a series of words I can't pronounce, which roughly translate to milk to the hairy ones. It was an obligatory task. To forget this ritual was to risk finding your prized sheepdog or your entire herd dead and rotted in the morning. In Ireland, it was believed that she-mounds, or fairy burghs, were dangerously opened to the world of humans on Samhain Eve, and if one was careless, he or she risked falling under a fairy spell, never to be returned to the human realm. Fortunately, most fairies are friendly and would not mind your joining in their revelry, but as with people, there are a few who have other agendas. If you seek out fairies on Samhain, carry with you a piece of iron which will give you power over almost any fairy you meet. The Norse invaders probably brought the idea of blood sacrifice into the Celtic Samhain observances, a custom not unfamiliar to the Celts because of similar druidic practices. Blood sacrifice was a logical addition to this Sabbath, since this was when the pagan god dies, his sacrifice enabling the goddess to start the year anew by giving rebirth to him at Yule. Blood sacrifice not only symbolized the god's demise, but sought to offer a substitute for him in death, so that he could be more quickly reborn. Fortunately, the pagan rede of harm none also applies to animals, and we have happily evolved out of our need to make a blood sacrifice of any kind to our deities. Today, wine ritually poured onto Mother Earth usually suffices as a sacrifice in both the Norse and Celtic traditions. With October comes the last of the apple harvest, and the idea of wassailing the apple trees was a Samhain ritual which was later moved to Yule, and then to Christmas through Roman and Nordic influence. The word wassail is an English contraction of the Anglo-Saxon words wes hall, which means good health. To wassail people, or the apple trees, meant to drink their health and well-being. Wassailing was usually done by a group of rowdies who had imbibed too much Samhain ale. They gathered weapons, stones, and cider, and went out to find the largest apple tree around. They fired their weapons or stones into its branches to frighten away evil fairies, and drank to the tree's health and sustenance. Today, wassailing has come to mean the drinking to the health of anyone, with a spiced punch prepared especially for the holiday. Wassail is served warm, usually in a punch bowl. There are numerous recipes for this concoction. This one is from the Galway region of Ireland. 1.5 cups of water, 1/2 cup heavy cream, 6 baked apples cut into small pieces, 5 egg whites, 1 1/4 cups granulated sugar, 1/2 teaspoon nutmeg, 2 teaspoons allspice, 1 teaspoon cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon ginger, 8 whole cloves, 1 quart ale, 1 cup cooking sherry, 1 cup Irish whiskey. Bring the water and cream to a slow boil and remove from heat. Beat the egg whites well. Thoroughly mix in all the remaining ingredients except the alcohol. Allow this mixture to cool slightly, enough so that the heat from it will not crack your punch bowl. If you have a non-glass container for your wassail, you can skip the cooling process. Blend in the alcohol just before serving, and be sure to offer the traditional toast to the old apple tree before drinking. Apples found their way into other Samhain lore. In Ireland, it is traditional in the weeks before the Sabbath to take an apple, carve it in half, pour your illnesses or bad habits into it, and put it back together. Bury it in the ground. This custom has been handed down as today's New Year's resolutions. In Teutonic traditions, apples were seen as signs of life, the very life force that animated the deities. Apples were buried at this time as a sacrifice to the deities to ensure the continuance of earthly life. In Rome, Samhain coincided with the festival of Pomona, the apple goddess. Bobbing for apples, a common Halloween party game, evolved from the idea of capturing the spirit of the dormant goddess who will grieve for her consort until Yule. To capture the fruit sacred to her was to ensure her continued presence and goodwill, even though she was to be in mourning for the next 6 weeks. In the Welsh tradition, apples represent the human soul, as is evidenced by the name they use for the land of the dead, Avalon, which means apple land. In Wales, apples were often ritually buried at Samhain to feed the dead souls in the underworld, who were waiting rebirth in the coming year. In the English traditions, Samhain altars featured apples, which is the food offering of the visiting spirits. A spirit who ate an apple was thought to be reinfused with life energy and would soon reincarnate. In England, this Sabbath is sometimes referred to as both the Feast of Apples and the Feast of the Dead. Samhain has always been considered the best time for divinations and other psychic work, which may have helped give rise to the anti-witch hysteria surrounding the Sabbath. Divination is the art of seeing into the future or discovering information about a person or situation by means of connecting with the universal collective unconscious, a vast storehouse of psychic knowledge. Several Samhain divinations concerned apples. If you pair an apple all in one piece on Samhain night and allow it to fall to the ground unaided, it will spell out the initials of your future mate. Hang an apple from a string with a coin pushed deep inside and try to bite out the coin without using your hands. Succeed, and your pockets will be full throughout the coming year. If you walk backward into a dark room while looking into a mirror and eating an apple at the same time, you will see your future mate's face in the mirror's reflection. From the Druids, we get hazelnut divination. Hazelnuts were sacred objects to the Druids, who would first toss them into divination patterns and then bury them to honor the old gods. Druids also ate the nuts to induce mystic wisdom, while barring their use by the common folk. To divine with hazelnuts, draw a small circle, about 1 foot in diameter, on the ground in front of you. Take 13 nuts and shake them around in your cupped hands while concentrating on your question. Gently toss the nuts in front of you. Those that land directly in the circle have the most bearing on you. If more land in the circle than out of it, you have the right to be concerned about the question you asked. Study the nuts for patterns which you can interpret. For example, if the nuts are all pointing in one direction, this could be an indication of a direction you will need to take your problem. If they appear in the form of a familiar object, use that information to apply to your question. Occasionally, they might fall to appear as letters of the alphabet, which you can relate to your question. A letter N might mean no, and a Y, yes, or they might be the initials of someone you know. Popular divinatory devices used in modern paganism are tarot cards, palmistry, the runes, and the controversial Ouija board. Unlike other divinatory devices, the Ouija board does not use the collective unconscious as the source for answers, but relies instead on asking unknown spirits to take over the device. Opening such a portal without having any control over who or what comes has its risks, but you will have to decide for yourself if they are worthy or not. With the possible exception of the Ouija board, these divinatory methods all take some time to learn to use properly. Your local occult shop or mail-order catalog can direct you to these items, and to books which explain in detail their use. There are 2 other methods of divination which require little in the way of equipment and can be learned by anyone, with a little patience. These are scrying and using a pendulum. Scrying is the art of gazing into an object while focusing your mind on one particular question or issue. The objects usually have reflective surfaces, such as mirrors, water, or crystals. To scry, focus your mind on one issue or question, and soften your focus and gaze, but do not stare into the surface of the object. After some time, visions should form. These may come either as entire scenarios played out with all the detail of a high-tech movie, or they may only be symbols that you will have to interpret for yourself. Many pagans like to set aside one special object for scrying, which they dedicate to their work like any other magical tool. The objects usually chosen are a small round mirror available at craft or drugstores, a small bowl with the bottom painted black which can be filled with water, or a crystal ball which can be costly, but many feel it is worth the expense. The choice is yours. Use what you feel best suits your needs. The pendulum is another divinatory tool associated with Samhain, which is easy to make and use. A pendulum is a heavy object on the end of a long chain, whose movements provide answers. Almost anything can be made into a pendulum. In medieval Germany, women used their wedding rings tied with a strand of their own hair. Today, pendulums are for sale in most occult shops and by mail order. Usually they consist of a quartz crystal on a silver chain. With a question formed firmly in your mind, hold the pendulum steadily over the center of the board. Allow the point to go where it chooses. Have pencil and paper ready to write down your answers. Record your findings in your book of shadows for later reference and to chart your progress and successes. You can make a special answer board for your pendulum by cutting a round piece of white poster board about the size of a dinner plate and marking the alphabet around the perimeter. You can also add numbers or use the letters to represent numbers such as A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, etc. You can also have arrows pointing clockwise for yes, go, and future, and counterclockwise for no, stop, and past. These are the traditional directions which have been used by pendulum users for centuries. You can host a Samhain party whether you have pagan friends or not, and even if no one knows your religious preferences. My best friend and I once hosted annual Samhain parties for our eclectic friends who were both pagans and non-pagans. Many present knew our religious preferences, and many others did not. But the parties were always a rousing success, a combination of the best old and new traditions. Later that night, those of us who were pagan were able to steal off into the backyard circle for some silliness and ritual after everyone else had left. If you choose to host a Samhain party, avoid featuring creepy seances, evil hags, and other negative decorations, and images that only damage pagans rather than promote the truth about us. Games should also be carefully chosen for fun and a bit of fright without falling into that trap. Divinations are excellent pastimes for Samhain parties, and people enjoy these even if they indulge only for the fun of it rather than with any serious intent. Have someone skilled in tarot, runes, or palmistry give readings for your guests, but avoid the controversial Ouija board if possible. For any party, or just to greet trick-or-treaters, have mood music on in the background. Celtic music serves this purpose well. If you wish to opt for something a little spookier, use Dance Macabre, Night on Bald Mountain, or buy one of the Haunted House sound effects records available in almost any store throughout October. With the death of the god, the wheel of the year turns again, bringing to us Yule and his rebirth. In paganism, death has never been seen as an end, but as a transition. We, like our god, will be born anew as the wheel of the year turns on and on. This last passage I want to read is from Queering Your Craft, Witchcraft from the Margins, by Cassandra Snow. I like this book because it has kind of a more modernized take on things, something that might seem a little archaic or not so inclusive from another book. You can definitely, if you're an eclectic witch, bend to suit your purposes, so I would like to read from this one as well. Samhain is the witchiest and spookiest of Sabbats, and because of that, it's so many witches' absolute favorite. I am including myself in that number. Samhain happens on October 31st, and arguably over November 1st as well. This is a cross-quarter Sabbat right between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. It marks the end of the harvest festival, so it's a good day to bring in the final fruits of your labor from the previous several seasons and store them for the next several months. It is, as all the harvest festivals are, a good day to give thanks and spoil yourself with the gains you've made. It's also, like the other harvest Sabbaths, a good day to take note of which seeds that you sowed grew and which ones didn't, and to recalibrate for the next time. Samhain is so exciting, though, because it shares space with Halloween and Day of the Dead in a number of cultures. It also shares purpose, tradition, and ritual potential with these days. Samhain is when the veil between our and other worlds is the thinnest, which makes it ideal for spirit communication and visits. It also makes it ideal for any magic and witchery. Any intention set or spell cast today will be heard loud and clear by the spiritual realms. Ancestor veneration and necromancy are big on these days, but I've also used the powerful energy for love and money spells that changed my life too. When a queer witch studies under me or takes one of my classes, I push them to think more deeply about our queer ancestry. Statistically, there are absolutely queer people in your lineage that you may be able to connect with. For some of us, that is a lot more difficult. Some of our families have intentionally written out any queerness in our family tree. For Black people, entire histories and lineages are often unknowable due to the egregious crime of slavery, where, on top of everything else, those stolen had their histories intentionally obscured. For adoptees or children of immigrants, it may be that any paperwork tracking is too much effort or not even possible. There are a couple of different ways you could try to connect, especially on Samhain. You could do a spirit connection ritual to specifically seek out LGBTQIA2S+ ancestors from your history, or you could do a similar ritual to find those ancestors in your more recent family history because, again, statistically, there have probably even been a couple in the past couple of generations. You could also connect to the idea of chosen ancestry. What queer people from history do you connect with? Could you do some research to find known queer people from your city or birthplace's history? You probably can. Connecting with those spirits is well aspected on Samhain. My favorite way to connect with queer ancestry, though, is to set up a spirit-reaching ritual that invites any LGBTQIA2S+ spirits and souls that want to connect with me to come in. That means sometimes I do get direct ancestors, and sometimes I get someone else entirely. Either way, I haven't imposed on someone who is resting peacefully, and I have connected with sacred queerness. Connection is only part of how we can reach spirits on Samhain or any time. In traditional lore, this is a time to honor our loved ones and ancestors who have passed on. As we feast and give thanks for the things we've grown and are now harvesting on Samhain, make sure you give thanks to any souls or spirits that have passed on who you feel have aided that growth. I built my dead people altar one Samhain and update it annually on the same day. While all of the harvest days can be used as feast days, this one is notable because we're meant to leave meals and spaces at the table for those same loved ones. A prayer of thanks or love is heard easily by those spirits on this day too, so it doesn't have to be a big ordeal. Samhain is very much a witch's Sabbath, and using this energy to grow your abilities as a witch, psychic, energy worker, or any other type of occult worker is exceedingly well aspected. Underworld or so-called dark gods love to be called on, and are more accessible over this 2-day period, making it a perfect time for big asks to help step into and grow your own power. While many of the Sabbaths offer chances for queer witches to step into their power and grow as a person, Samhain offers this explicitly for our witchcraft. While none of our spiritual practices has to be for other people, it can be. If you're developing skills to help heal and empower marginalized seekers, Samhain is a beautiful time to power up.